With that said, let's get to our first topic. And this is one that just popped up, I think it was a day or so ago. And it has to do with Blizzard and Heroes of the Storm. So, if you don't know what that is, Heroes of the Storm is Blizzard's own take at the MOBA scene. It's been in development, or it's been an ongoing game now up since 2015. And Blizzard was, of course, positioning it, as with most of their games, as the next big esport. But as of this week, it has been confirmed that developers are being pulled off of it. I didn't see the chat. Let's see. There we go. Blizzard has pulled off their development team from Heroes of the Storm and are trying to enter into kind of the quote-unquote maintenance mode, which means no more, no more like monthly or weekly updates, no more events, just kind of letting the game, coast along. But it also means that there will not be any more esports events for Heroes of the Storm. And no more esports events mean there's not going to be no more real competitive league for that game. So, as an esport, it is basically life support has been pulled off of that game. And this is a very interesting prospect here. And it's one thing that I know I've been talking to other Josh about on and off, because he follows and covers a lot of the stuff in terms of esports when he was at PvP Live. And it's a very interesting situation, I think, when we talk about esports and the developers, because it's kind of like an uneasy alliance. And this is why I want to have this talk while you're on, Rob, since you, of course, follow, or you're part of the NBA 2K League.
Yeah.
And the fact that, on one hand, you have the community, you have your pro players, you have your streamers, you have, local and national events. But on the other hand, you have the developers. You have the people who are making this game, who are updating this game. They're keeping it alive. And both are kind of in this symbiotic relationship in order to make this work as an esport. And I think this is different from what we see with what we have as quote-unquote conventional sports. Again, like here in the United States, the NFL is not going away. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow to find that the Philadelphia Eagles are no longer a thing. I think that would be the sign of the apocalypse when that happens. Like, we don't have to worry about that. But before I go into another little rant, I want to get your thoughts again, Rob. Like, what do you think about this whole relationship when it comes to the esports community and just esports in general?
It's a tough one. I mean, the esport that I work in is vastly different from the others, as I'm sure the players of those sports would, or those games would definitely, say really loudly. But it is very tough because you have the athletes themselves and the fans, and they both are very, like, the fans are more demanding than the athletes themselves. The athletes are getting paid to do something, and they are professionals, and they'll go in and play the game and not complain too much. But the fans, especially if they're trying to become pros, that's when the complaints start coming out. And for something like Heroes of the Storm, like the complaints versus the actual pros is probably bad, because I look at them as like Snapple. They're third place. They're never catching Coke or Pepsi, and they should know that. And I feel like now they've finally just thrown in the towel. I mean, they're Blizzard. They're not used to being third place.
Yeah, and I think that is a very interesting point there. And I think either Draken or Ether made a post on our Discord about how Blizzard may be experiencing some pushback with their relationship with Activision this year, with Activision wanting to cut costs. And Blizzard is not a company that knows how to, cut costs or, not put 100% into a game.
Yeah, they are not known for that at all, I would say. And the fact is, like, for Heroes of the Storm, every time I heard about it, like being streamed as a tournament or something, the first thing I thought is, oh, they're still doing it. So this particular move comes as no surprise to me, just for the fact that it's not the primo. It is, League of Legends and Dota are the big MOBA games, and that they will not be caught. And so that part isn't surprising. But yes, if there's any conflict between Blizzard and Activision, I wonder who's gonna balk first. I feel like Activision would, because Blizzard has a major following. Anything they obviously not everything they touch turns to gold, but everything they touch,
Sorry about that.
exactly. Everything they touch gets a huge amount of attention from everybody, whereas everything Activision releases isn't necessarily even on people's radars.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like that. It's almost like the deal with the devil, except this time it's Activision, on the receiving end of that. Because, as you said, all Blizzard has to say is, guess what? Activision is the reason for Diablo Immortal. Or, guess what? We were going to work on Diablo 4, but Activision told us no, and there will be riots in the streets there.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, luckily I moved out of the LA area, so I'm safe from the Activision buildings being assaulted.
That's good.
In that particular case, it just, for some reason, it just snapped into my head that one response Steam could have to any competition is just to release Half-Life 3. Just to okay, we're finally going to break out the big guns, so to speak.
But taking this back to the combination of esports and such, as you said with Blizzard especially has been a very interesting company when it comes to this, because we were discussing this with Starcraft, for instance, and again, this unshaky kind of alliance there, because as we know, when it comes to something like Starcraft, it's not just, as you said, the players. You have the community, you have streamers, you have broadcasters, you have all the companies in South Korea who are funding these tournaments, who are keeping these players happy. And it raises that point about, what if one day Blizzard says, you know what, we're tired of StarCraft, kill all the servers. That would just decimate a lot of people's lives and a lot of careers out there. And I remember talking to Josh about this. Like, what happens if you are let's say, a well-known StarCraft streamer, and StarCraft is no longer being supported at the competitive level? Do you go to another game? Do you stop? What if you banked on yourself? You made that as a part of your career. What happens? And this is the same thing for esports players. What if, Activision, or I'm sorry, who runs Mortal Kombat? Is that Midway or Acclaim? Or is Acclaim even still in business? No, WB Interactive. I'm sorry. I'm mixing up all my names here. But what if WB Interactive says, you know what? We don't want to do Injustice anymore. We're done with Mortal Kombat. NetherRealms, you go work on something else. And they do that. What happens to all those players? If you miss the Game Awards, Sonic Fox won, professional esports player. What if, one of his games goes away? What do you go to next?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know we're in our infancy, and we are just doing our tryouts for the second year, and you just see these thousands of players who have given up an awful lot of time.
Oh yeah,
and some have left school, some have left or put work on hold, school on hold. And yeah, when you're at that particular age that esports players generally are, early 20s, late teens, you give up an awful lot. And if the rug gets pulled out from under you, yeah, where do you land? Because that's not exactly a skill you can take to the real world businesses. I was a League of Legends player when the league was still going on. Yeah, no person's going to be like, oh, that's interesting. Do you have a degree? That's the kind of stuff that is worrisome, but that's worrisome in any sport. If you get an injury, that kind of thing, it kind of comes with the territory. So you take the ride and you hope it goes somewhere, I think.
Or or another point is that a lot of the esport games at that level, it requires basically to relearn that game. Again, there is a huge difference between someone playing Smash Brothers Ultimate versus Dragon Ball Fighter Z.
Yeah.
But as you also said there, Rob, where do you go? And it's the same thing I think we see with YouTubers and Twitch streamers, and it's a really great parallel to the fact, I was just at my book signing earlier today, that for me, while I'm on YouTube, while I'm doing this stuff, I know that I'm not putting all my eggs into a third-party platform like that. But
Yeah.
there are a lot of people on YouTube or Twitch that's it. Their day is literally spending 60 hours a day on this platform, and that's it. They're not
Hmm.
going to school. They don't have a part-time job. They don't have any other skills. So what happens when they lose that? What
Yeah.
happens like if you decide one day I don't want to do YouTube anymore, or I'm tired of Twitch? Where do you go? Like again, for me, I have game wisdom. I have my presentations. I have a second book. I have other things in the fire. But
Hmm.
if your whole life for 6 to 8 years is playing a game, is playing an esport game, or making YouTube videos, and then that's gone, what's your plan B?
Yeah, it's a tough question, and having that backup is always important. I
Mm-hmm.
know athletes who early on, when especially in the NBA, when they would skip college, yeah, you get injured, then what do? You have to somehow figure out how to go back
Yep.
to college, and you can't get a scholarship anymore. So you do want to have something there, especially if you are an esport player. Like, say, let's just take Ninja, who's kind of a famous
Mm-hmm.
example of this. He was a pro gamer, he was a pro player, and now he has a career as a Fortnite streamer, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That's keeping him going, and um, certainly he can play at a competitive level still, but that he kind of had that fallback because he was a popular streamer, he was a
Mm-hmm.
popular content provider, and not many people have that. Like, if his were to go away, he could probably find his way back into esports in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So he does. He's got a few different irons in the fire. He definitely has tournaments he runs in, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
in Vegas, and that kind of thing. So it's about it's always about the portfolio. You want to
Mm-hmm.
keep that as open as humanly possible.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, when you go all in, if the whole purpose of all in is you could lose everything,
Yeah.
or win everything.
Exactly. And like with like Ninja, we're also seeing a lot of pushback about when he causes controversy, like when he had that statement about he doesn't play with female streamers. Doctor Disrespect has ran into trouble as well. I'm sure the people watching us right now probably know more examples than we do because we're
Yeah.
both not like big Fortnite streamers, so we don't really
No.
follow that scene too much. But it's that same thing we see with athletes. I mean, there have been many, many stories over the last few years about athletes getting in trouble for, gambling, domestic abuse, drugs, you name it. And when that happens, that's kind of, as you just said, Rob, when it comes to going all in. If you are a professional football player in the NFL and you get caught, robbing, or you get into a fight, or you get arrested, guess what? There's a good chance your career is done. And not
Yeah.
only is it done there, you're being seen at the national level. Who's going to want to hire somebody who has just been, arrested for, beating up their wife or their spouse? And it's no real joke there. But again, it's one of those cases of you go all in, that's it. Like, there is no plan B in that case.
Yeah, and it is worth always knowing that you might think you're special, but there are thousands of people ready to take your place at a moment's notice and
Mm-hmm.
willing to work their butts off to do so.
Yeah. I mean, it is the same thing with YouTube and Twitch. Again, while names like Ninja and Dr. Disrespect are huge right now, they're still very much in that same pool of if they go away, there's 30 or probably a few hundred other people who would be more than happy to become the next face of Fortnite or Call of Duty or whatever.
Yeah, and I just I gotta check my memory here because in terms of Ninja's popularity for Fortnite,
Mm-hmm.
how long has that been? Has it been more than say a year and a half, or
It,
has it been actually 2 years? Because
mm,
my memory is completely fading here. But
mine too.
in terms of Fortnite's like big jump into the popular culture,
Mm-hmm.
how long has that been? So much has happened for me in this time that I just don't remember.
According to the website, or according to Wikipedia, the Battle Royale mode was launched in September of last year.
Oh my God. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, see how fleeting this stuff is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing is how fast things change these days. Nothing is
Mm-hmm.
nothing is guaranteed. A real quick question: sign up after semester of learning OpenGL computer graphics. I realize it isn't for me. The math is too confusing. Well, I will throw something out there for you, Jake. And I started my career in college. Well, career my collegiate thing with in computer science, and I quickly realized that that wasn't for me, and I went into media arts, and then from there into games QA, and then production. So, um, take the path that makes the most sense to you, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I said in my presentation, you need to figure out what area you're best at and then develop that up. Because there will always be people, like if you're trying to develop a game on your own, there are plenty of people out there who have their own skill set and where they're weak at that you can fit into that role as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's not the easiest thing to try and do. I know it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to figure out like what you're wanting to do, especially with regards to what college offers. It doesn't always offer everything. Certainly, back in my day, games degrees were not did not grow on trees. As I wouldn't say they grow on trees these days, but certainly most colleges offer something like that. They did not back in my time. So um, take advantage of what your school can give you. If you have any professors you like, go just ask their opinions and stuff. That's usually going to give you a lot more a bigger picture, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, nice! Congratulations.
Nice.
You looking to continue in school, or are you gonna go for jump into the professional industry right away? Not to take this discussion too far off topic. Just curious. All right, cool.
All right.
Let me steer it back. I'm sorry
That's
for
okay.
the aside.
But back on topic then, and I think this is one of the very interesting things, and I want to get your thoughts on this as well, Rob, that again, when we grew up playing video games, there were no such thing as esports. Hell,
Yeah.
video games are still considered that niche thing that nobody expected to do all that well. We started to see, like the high score challenges, Twin Galaxies, that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
the idea about playing video games at the quote unquote professional level is still relatively new in the mainstream. Again, Starcraft's been around since the mid 90s. We all know that. We've seen, the videos from South Korea and the insanity there. But
Mhm.
it does raise this very interesting point about, you know, is this like, do you think we'll continue to see like schools and colleges push for esports programs?
Yes, I do. I think that esports is especially attractive because one, way more people can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean that the way more people can compete at the highest of levels. I just mean that you don't have to be 6'6" to like qualify to play basketball. You don't have to have a 48-inch vertical.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have and in order to practice, you just have to have a computer, basically.
Yep.
So it's suddenly got a lot more people to look at,
Yep.
and it's cheap.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to invest in a court. You invest in a few computers in a nice room. That's all you got to do. The maintenance is relatively easy. It's just such a slam dunk. Not to use a weird term for esports, but like it's super attractive. And the changing landscape, I don't feel like isn't having anyone panic these days, because there's always going to be players of every type of game, and people who, let me put this down, stop fiddling with it, and plenty of people who are able to teach that. Like, you can be a professional in League of Legends and then go and teach an esports class, even if it's for like a Rocket League type thing. You might not be able to have the same skills, but you know how esports works.
Yep. And I hope other Josh is watching this right now. I hope his ears are burning as we're having this esports discussion. Thank you, Draken. Yes, we need more RTSs. I concur with that.
Yes, and I am going caveman. No, this is just my look once I let things go for long enough. I had to work last weekend, so just tends to get out of control. We also got 2 new dogs, so that's kept us busy.
It's the fabled game developer's beard. When you're in the game industry, you have to grow a beard at some point. It's like, I think Tim Schafer did that once.
Check it off the list.
Yeah. Yep, and that's a big point there too, Malwinius. And again, like it's the same thing with the MMO industry that everybody's been trying to make the next big esport. I mean,
Yeah.
there are a slew of
Oh my
of
God.
of games on Steam with people trying to be the next competitive game. There was a title that you had to buy your own bullets that I think that died in a month. We're even seeing more developers again, as we've said, go for the Battle Royale mode. Because if you missed the announcement, Rob, there's now a Battle Royale in Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike went free to play and now has Battle Royale mode.
Yeah.
And it's very hard. I mean, I think building your own esport, I think that's a topic that's probably too big for this discussion. I think that could easily fit its own there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And,
especially when the esports thing kicked off with a game that wasn't intending to be an esport, and it just kind of grew into that in Starcraft, and I don't want to say that that was the first one. I don't know, but it that one just kind of that was the big one that kind of grew from. It just grew naturally, and now
and
everyone's trying to make esport as the primary aspect of the game, and that's tough.
and Street Fighter began as a bunch, or the fighting game community, I should say, began as a bunch of local people the Battle of the Bay contests. With I think it was Street Fighter 2 back in the early 90s, and then they got all together to form Evo, or I think it was called something else before that. And I was speaking to Josh about this, and like the fighting game community is basically about them. They don't care about the publishers, they don't care about marketing. It's them wanting to play these games. It's very much player first, and I think that's kind of very interesting. It's why we still see people playing stuff like Skullgirls. Why there's still all these other fighting games being around because that's what they want to play. They don't care if Capcom decides to cancel Street Fighter V. They'll find something else. And we have seen many developers try and court the fighting game community, but they are very picky along those lines, just like with all the esports in general. Like the CCG community is another really great example of that. How
Yeah.
hard has it been for people to push against Hearthstone and even to another extent Magic the Gathering?
Yeah, really want to. Did we lose? Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry, my stream kind of lost. So, but yeah, this the CC, especially when that started in Magic. That
Mm-hmm.
started as a in person game.
Yeah.
To jump into an esport as collectible as a CCG, like I don't know how you do that because the amount of skill needed to be in an esport to make it like
Mm-hmm.
an interesting esport to watch is insane. So how do you kick off a game and have people instantly at a high level of competition?
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I don't know how you do that. That it makes little sense to me. I feel like the only reason our game 2K was able to jump into esports, and it's still yet to be seen how successful it's going to be, was because the game had been around for 20 years, and the NBA has been around for way
Yeah.
longer, decades and decades. So it's got the infrastructure to survive, whether it fails or succeeds. But you make a game just hoping to be an esport that's never existed before.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking a big risk there. You're talking like we were talking earlier about a player trying to get into an esport
Mm-hmm.
and having no backup plan. Well, this is a company spending tens of millions of dollars, if not
Yep.
more, uh, on a game that probably won't succeed.
Yeah. And like, again, it's a very shaky relationship because if the game is great but the players don't come, then you have an esport. But let's say
Yeah.
you have plenty of players, but nobody wants to play this game, then it doesn't really matter. Then it's dead on that front.
Mm.
Trying to think of a good example. Like it reminds you of Evolve, that the team-based FPS from the developers of Left 4 Dead. They were always having trouble courting players to that game. And again, without having that community, you don't have the support to keep this game going. But
Mhm.
if you don't have the support to keep this game going, then you're not going to have players to stay around and play the game. So you need a lot of stuff to go right, and it's very hard to do that. Yeah, like Evolve could have made it, but again, it's one of those things where you can't really support a game for like 2 to 5 years and hope that people are going to be there. One of the reasons why Payday 2 has done so well was that it built off the success of the first game, and there was already a community there. And they kept going. I mean, they just had, I think, their 5-year anniversary this past year for Payday 2. And I think they're going to move on to Payday 3 very shortly. And they have that built-in market. But we mentioned CCGs, and I want to go back to this for a second. Rob, did you have you followed or have you done anything with Artifact yet?
No, I have not.
Do you know what Artifact is?
I do not.
That is Valve's kind of tower defense meets CCG kind of game that they released a few weeks ago. And from reports saying it is not doing as well, as everybody hoped. It is a game that you have to buy in to play, but then it's all microtransaction based on top of that. From what people are saying, they're saying it has depth and complexity, but it is horrible for like a first player or a first timer's experience.
Yeah, that can make sense. Like, I don't know how Valve does things in terms of their games anymore, but I feel like the reason that Blizzard can get away with doing the esport games from scratch is because they're Blizzard.
Yeah.
Valve was, Valve. They were releasing great games all the time. And it just feels like, they jumped off the radar, focused on Steam forever, and it just, I don't know. I don't know if I feel like they're as gamey of a company as they used to be.
And that's another, 2-hour discussion right there.
Yeah.
And Fallout 76 is also not doing well, as another case of a developer losing a lot of their goodwill. But I love what you just said there, Rob, that it worked from Blizzard because it's Blizzard. That could just describe, that could just be the motto for so many things. Why is Diablo 3 popular? It's Blizzard. Why is Overwatch good? It's Blizzard. We just use that. That saves a lot of time for these discussions. Yeah. But getting back on track, I'm still really curious, and that's another point there too, Ether, about what's going on with Gwent. And Gwent has been I hate to say it, but I think this may be another case of a very slow death happening for that game. Since again their big homecoming release and announcement, I have not heard anything out of the game. And this is a point we talked about before when it comes to the quote-unquote lifestyle games. And it's the same thing for esports. What happens when the developer makes a change or adjusts the game in a way that it annoys the fans? And what if this is a professional game? We mentioned this, I think, the last time, that football is football here in the United States. They're not changing the rules in the coming months or years. But just imagine, again, if they did do that. If, let's say, the NFL was a lifestyle or a games as a service kind of approach, that every few months they change how the game plays, it will completely destroy the balance there. So, with stuff like Gwent, with other esports, what happens if the developer releases something that pisses off the majority of the fan base, and suddenly you don't have those people watching this game anymore? And then, what do you do as a player? What if tomorrow, what if some strange thing happens and tomorrow everybody stops caring about Fortnite? Every, fan just says, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. What happens to Ninja? What happens to all those streamers and YouTubers? And I'm sure people have there's toys now on Fortnite. What happens to all that?
Yeah, that's especially a good question with Fortnite. I mean, the fans of Fortnite, luckily for teenagers, are known for having just lockdown. They are good with just to stick to one thing for forever. That's the one thing about teenagers, is that their attention is not fleeting. And that becomes a problem, right? Of course they're fleeting. So the next thing to come out, it could be the next bright, shiny object, and just who cares about Fortnite anymore all of a sudden?
By the way, every time I've mentioned Fortnite to teenagers when I give my presentations, every one of them hates Fortnite.
Really?
It is hilarious. Every time I have a bunch of teens in, I say, so what do you think about Fortnite? I'm sick and tired of that game. It just cracks me up that I've not had one kid in any of the presentations say, ooh, I love Fortnite. And I had a 20-minute conversation with a parent at the bookstore earlier that she is anti Fortnite. She will not let her son come within 10 feet of that game because she's
Hey,
heard all this
smart.
about people being addicted to it. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
don't know about addictive, but I mean, you suddenly are launched into the realm of online video gamers, which is
mhm,
not a pleasant place to be all the time. But that is true about Fortnite. You know, like as soon as people catch on to it, teenagers tend to not like it anymore.
mhm.
So we'll see. We'll see how it keeps doing. It could be a juggernaut already, and it's hard to fail once you've gotten enough money out of it.
Hmm. Like when Ninja went on Ellen, for instance, I think that hit like peak. Oh my god, I think it may be too big there. But yeah, like
Yeah.
again, we're joking about this, but it does raise a very serious point again about this nature of esports that there's a lot of money and a lot of people wrapped up in this. And it's very easy, I think, for, the thread to unravel if they're not careful. Like Overwatch, for instance, I've heard Overwatch has bounced back, but there's a time where that people just weren't caring about it as an esport. It's very hard, I think, to broadcast that game compared to again like something like Street Fighter or Rocket League. So what happens?
Yeah, and that's another good game to bring up because Overwatch is one of those that I have an interest in, but it came out as an esport and as a complex esport that was complex to watch and different to watch than all the other existing esports that were
Hmm.
alike. It tried to be a MOBA at the same time as kind of like a first-person shooter perspective, and when I was
Hmm.
watching it, certainly I'm not the target market, but um, it's not easy to follow. Whereas Dota and League of Legends, while complex games in their own right, they're relatively, you can kind of take a step back and you just know, okay, there's the one team and there's the other team, and they're both
Hmm.
trying to get to the other side in some respect, and
Yeah.
that's relatively easy to understand. And the game just gets more complex as you're more interested in it. Rocket League is a similar way. It's very easy to grasp when you
Yeah.
watch it. Like you can just be someone flipping channels. You come to Rocket League and there's like cards playing soccer. That's weird. I'm in. You watch it and you're just interested by it and you know exactly
Or
offhand what's going on.
you watch like something like a fighting game. Two
Hmm.
people, guy on the left is punching guy on the right, health bar is going down. Whoever empties first wins,
Yeah.
or whoever beats the other one wins. Like it is easy to follow there, and then as you said, the depth is under the surface. We could argue the same thing about stuff like golf or tennis or any professional sport that you can watch. I mean, plenty of people watch NASCAR. Plenty of people
Yeah.
watch football. They watch soccer. It is a sport you can enjoy. But if you want to take that next step, there is depth there. And I think that's another big point about, again, what makes these esports popular, that you need to have that beginner's foot in the door. You know,
Hmm.
somebody, like as you said, the beauty about esports is I don't need to go to a professional court. I don't need to spend, hundreds of dollars on a golf trainer. I can load up Fortnite. I can load up Street Fighter on my computer or my console, and there's my training. I'm getting my practice.
Yeah. And just to continue on Overwatch,
Hmm.
they have a further complexity as well. Certainly, there's levels where, I mean, they change the rules every single round.
Yeah.
So you might like, here's one, oh, capture the flag. Okay, I grasp that. I finally understand it. Then they switch it,
Hmm.
and it's now about kills. And then they switch it again, and there's a different objective. So it's very difficult on a lot of levels for a new person to jump in and watch and understand.
Hmm.
And certainly for fans of many esports over the last few years, certainly they can jump in and understand all the middle mini games because they, of course, have played it in a variety of different games over time.
Hmm.
Um, but that was a tough sport for me to understand that, or even imagine will be successful in the long run, because it doesn't grab new players just immediately. It's tough. So that just goes back to the whole esport: is how successful can this stuff be? And they dumped a ton of money into it right away.
Yeah.
That is one thing I'm noticing, is that these people making the new esports are somehow able to sell it to investors. Like, oh, esports is the next big thing. Give us $100
And
million.
sponsors as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that actually takes me to, I think, what will be my final point for this topic, and I'll throw it to you, Rob. And that is the idea of a small success when it comes to esports. Like, as we said, when we think esports, we think Counter-Strike, we think Dota, Fortnite, Overwatch. As you said, these are games with millions, if not billions of dollars at this point tied into it between the players, developers, sponsors, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But can there be a small esport? I've seen a few examples. I know Smite is popular. Tetris is still going on. There are competitive Tetris leagues.
Yeah, I used to go when I lived in Portland. They have the championship there every year. I got to see the World Championships twice, and that was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
That was really interesting.
So, do you think, developers and companies, do you think that they can be happy with a small success, or do you think everybody is trying to be the next Dota? Because I think, if they go that route, again, we go back to the MMO market. Everybody was trying to be the next World of Warcraft, and nobody could be the next World of Warcraft.
Yeah, I think in terms of launching an esport, in terms of getting investors,
Mm-hmm.
you can't sell somebody on, well, we're going to try and get
100,000 people.
Yeah, you can't really sell that. Now, in terms of actual small numbers esports, I think you look in, like what you were saying earlier, in how Street Fighter got to be an esport. You have to look at the community. Smash Brothers in particular is one of those games where it's a super successful game, but as an esport, up until recently, it was very local. They made it impossible to almost impossible to stream that stuff, and let alone play online. So I remember people would bring in CRTs, a CRT televisions to play each other, and this was as not even 5 years ago. So I feel like Smash Brothers is that relatively minor esport that, as a game, it's a huge success, but as an esport, it's still in its ground area. But I feel like Nintendo's like, whatever, it's a huge game, we don't care so much. The community kind of drives the esport aspect of it.
Yeah. To Mike's point, does esports encourage game addiction? Like we've said in an earlier talk, that all the best video games are addictive. It's just how the game encourages or keeps the player interested in playing. Because we could say the same thing about football. Football could be an addiction to the people who go to every game, who dress up, who spend hundreds of dollars on paraphernalia and outfits and such. And I think it's a different kind of addiction when we compare it to something like for the free-to-play market, loot boxes, monetization, things like that. But what do you think about that, Rob?
I think it's a yes and no. It's addictive. It encourages game addiction in that it might have loot boxes and that kind of thing that is kind of, on the gambling side of things, depending on how you look at it. Most people say yes, so I'm, kind of on that side too. But yes, in the sense that would consider give you or encourage game addiction. But as a sport itself, it just encourages it. It encourages a lot of playtime because that's what you need. And in terms of someone who wants to play professional basketball or football, you need to do that anyway. You need to spend 14 hours a day playing, or else you're not going to come anywhere near a professional league. Mm-hmm. So it's a yes and no answer from me, I think.
Yeah. And I think, we're getting more and more points here in these conversations, but it goes back to what we said before, that there's as you also said, Rob, there is a difference between somebody who plays a game as an esport versus somebody who plays it as an addiction or just plays it casually. You playing Call of Duty for 30 hours a week and ignoring your job and everything like that is different compared to somebody who plays a game, 40 hours a week, who's on a professional team, who's, going to every major tournament, who's researching all the best tactics. And it just leads, again, like you said, it's yes and no in that regard.
Yeah, it's a tough question because I think it does come down to a more general game addiction question.
Yeah, but we could certainly spend another hour on this topic, and we're not careful. I may keep Rob here as long as we were in the last few weeks. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you have any final points on the topic, and then we'll go on to our weird game segment?
Actually, no. I feel like we've gone through certainly we could talk a lot more about any number of the tendrils that have come out of this conversation. So, yeah, I think that it's been well covered, and the comments have been great.
Mm-hmm. So I guess here's my question for the recorded people watching this right now. Do you think that we will continue to see, or are you in supporting of esports becoming more mainstream? Of us seeing, televised events. We've seen a few on TBS. But again, like, what about seeing, the top, like, imagine having Evo on NBC. Or, instead of just having Monday Night Football, we have Wednesday Night Rocket League or stuff like that. Do you think that would be the future of esports?
I mean, if you don't mind me answering,
sure.
Like as soon as you said that, I was like, I mean, that's a great question. Like, I feel like the future of television is more in question there. Who's grabbing esports? Is it going to be Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime? That's where my question goes to. Not so much is NBC going to grab it, though they might. I have a feeling that you're going to start seeing that, like, channels like that play with it in off hours. But we'll see. Like, I don't know.
But I think with that, let's move on to some weird games, and then we'll see if we can come up with a topic number 2.